Hello, I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. I am in Belfast now, and the first thing I need to say is thank you for everyone who watched and subscribed to the last video, the one about Ireland being richer than the UK and why I felt that was. Thank you very much to all of you. I just wanted to say that right off the bat. For those of you who are coming to this fresh and haven't seen the last video, well, obviously go watch it. It did well, so there's something to that, one would think. But this one is about a united Ireland, and I will come on to that very briefly. I promise it's coming very soon, particularly as I want to keep this video relatively short. But I want to talk about, essentially, I'm back in Belfast, which is where I arrived about 16 days ago. And then I've essentially done a circle around the island of Ireland. So we came to we took the ferry from Liverpool to Belfast. That was about 16 days ago. It was 16 days ago. I'm trying to do the math. Was it 16, 17 days? I'm pretty sure it was 16. Then we drove around the Antrim coast, went to Giant's Causeway, Bushmills, then sort of through Derry, Donegal, down the west coast to Galway. We stayed in Galway for a bit. Then we drove down the west coast pretty much all the way to the Ring of Kerry, stayed in a town called Kenmare. That was lovely. Then we went through Cork, and then stayed in a place called Lismore, which, as you know if you watched the last video, that's where I made the last video from. Very lovely. We were, some of you talked about Lismore Castle. We were actually just basically on the grounds of Lismore Castle in that video. It was... what we were told was the essentially like the staff's HQ, their headquarters, where the staff lived, was where we were, was part of where we were staying. Converted, I'm sure. I don't have any doubt. But basically just right on the grounds of the castle, so we were right there, and that was really great. And then we drove up to Dublin, and Dublin was a hoot. I mean, I've been to Dublin many times. I should say the last time I was in Dublin was right before the EU referendum, actually. And I was doing a piece, and I was torturing myself over this while I was there. I was doing a piece, and I can't remember if it was for a major publication as a journalist or it was for a think tank. And I just can't remember. All I remember is I was like paid to be there, as in my expenses were paid, and I was actually making money by being there. And I interviewed John Bruton, who was former Irish Prime Minister, Taoiseach. And it was a great. We had I did the interview over pints of Guinness in a pub right by St. Stephen's Square. He was amazing. That was a great sort of moment for me. And I was thinking in my journalistic career, but was it in my journalistic career? Because I was trying to find the article that I would have done it on, which makes me think, given that I can't find the article, it must have been for a think tank. It must have been for a think tank. Anyway. Sort of doesn't matter. Water under the bridge. And speaking of the bridge, I was when I was in Dublin on that trip interviewing Bruton, I stood on the river. I think it was the Halfpenny Bridge. I'm pretty sure it was, and looked over it. And I remember we're just watching the river flow beneath me, seeing both sides of Dublin, and thinking, I think the world's fucked. I think we're really screwed. I think everything's going to go to hell pretty soon. And what scares me is I was how unbelievably right I was about that, standing there whenever it was, February, March 2016. Anywho, this time was very different in Dublin, a very different, less existential trip. So while we were there, I don't know, many of you will know this, particularly a UK audience, but there was a college football game, as in an American football game, played by college teams in Dublin. This happens every year. I think it's called the Aer Lingus Classic, as in it's sponsored by the airline. And this year it was Kansas State, Iowa State. So if you can imagine, the center of Dublin was besieged not just by Americans, like not just, if you're thinking London, right? You think, yeah, you've got some American tourists, but they'll generally be from like New York or LA, or if they're from the Midwest or from Chicago, certainly. Very metropolitan, liberal elite type Americans. Anyway, this was people from Kansas and Iowa, people from real America, right? And that was really fascinating. That was incredible. I had a few chats with some of the football fans, and it was a it was a weird but wonderful Dublin experience. Anyway, now I'm back in Belfast, going back to Britain tomorrow, sailing back to Liverpool, and then we'll just drive from Liverpool back to London. We thought about staying in Liverpool or maybe just staying somewhere in the Midlands or something, kind of halfway, but then we thought, why bother? It's probably going to be, you can actually drive from Liverpool to London in about 4.5 if the roads are completely clear. And of course they won't be, but they'll be clear between 7 and 11 or midnight, which is when we're going to be doing it tomorrow. Anyway, that's catching you up. What you're actually here for, if you stuck around this long and you haven't got sick of me and you were going to talk about a united Ireland and you haven't got to it. So one of the things about being in Belfast, again, I've been in Belfast a few times this year already for various professional reasons. So I have been over here talking to business owners in Belfast and businesses in other parts of Northern Ireland, Ballymena, bits of Antrim. And one of the interesting things about it was I was talking to people who were generally from, family-wise, they were Protestants, they were from a loyalist background. And by the way, I just one note, one of the things that's interesting, having been in the Republic of Ireland for however long it was, not quite a fortnight, but close. It's really interesting coming back to Northern Ireland and obviously seeing all the Union flags. And we, not where we're staying in Belfast, but where we drove through, it was a sort of proper loyalist, no dicking around, some... there was a few photos, murals that were a bit paramilitary-esque. This wasn't Shankill Road, by the way. It was somewhere completely. It was actually a very different part of Belfast, but very much announcing itself as a loyalist community. Anyway, these business people in Northern Ireland, they were talking to me very much about how, there'll be a united Ireland in a few years. And again, this wasn't a group of nationalists in I don't know, near the border, or these were people in Belfast or north of Belfast, in Antrim, talking about how there's going to be a united Ireland and they don't really see a way around it. And it was entirely economic, because what they're noticing in their businesses is they used to trade back and forth much more with Great Britain. So they used to get a lot more stuff from Britain that they would sell, and they used to sell a lot more into Britain. And those two things are quite remarkably rapidly changing, and they have changed quite remarkably rapidly over the last few years. So they're getting a lot more stuff from Ireland or elsewhere in the EU, and they're selling a lot more into Ireland, the Republic, and else in continental Europe. And of course, the whole reason for this is Brexit, right? It just is. And people will often comment to me, because I'm obviously vocally anti-Brexit, and I have been, and it's one of the big things I'm known for, that I like to blame everything on Brexit, or I like to generalize about what Brexit has done and has, the idea that I would just want to blame everything on Brexit and everything at Brexit's door, and if we were back in the EU, everything would magically be better, different, etc. But this is really, really, in terms of stuff that you want to blame Brexit on, this is probably top of the list. This is unequivocal. Because we were really in a position where a united Ireland was really off the table completely. It was very difficult to see how it was ever going to really be seriously discussed ever again. Because you had the Good Friday Agreement in 1999, and it meant many, many things that came out of that. But one of it was just, okay, this is the status quo. This is what it is. There's going to be a Northern Ireland. There's going to be a Republic of Ireland. It's, and essentially we're all just going to have to get along, and this is the way it is. And the Troubles ended, and the violence for the most part ended, at least on a large scale. We didn't have IRA bombings in Great Britain any longer, etc. since, right? So there was a peace that had been reached there. One of the big worries about Brexit was that that was going to be disrupted. But what people really worried about was there was going to be sort of a reignition of the Troubles. So you were going to have the IRA kind of really refire themselves and say, hey, actually, you know what, we can get a united Ireland again now that we've got Brexit. And you were going to have a counterbalance to that, which would be the loyalists getting terrified, and particularly after what happened with Brexit, which was, I think, inevitable, and how anyone was surprised by it, I don't know, but that essentially Northern Ireland was going to be left in the single market for goods. The customs union was essentially going to be part of, for customs purposes, was going to be left in the EU and detached from Brexit Britain, basically. That was entirely predictable, but one would have thought that that would have caused more. There was a worry anyway that that was going to cause political violence to reemerge in Northern Ireland in a way that would be obviously horrible and no one wanted. And what's interesting is that hasn't happened, and yet a united Ireland feels very close and actually is being talked about by people who, you know, people from loyalist backgrounds, Protestant backgrounds in Northern Ireland who, you know, would have had grandparents who probably might have been, I'm not going to say they were, I have no idea, I'm not casting aspersions on anyone, it's not even casting aspersions. Well, why would we bother with that? What would be the point? Why would we? Yeah, why would we care? Why would we? Why bother? Really? Because if it's just much easier to sell into Ireland, well, that's what we'll do. Because that's how business works. That's how trade flows work. It's very basic, very simple, and it's one of the things that made talking about Brexit so difficult for that whole period of time that we had to talk about it. Anyway, I am going with the business people and think it's probably inevitable. I think the problem is, okay, so several things. I'm not really sure it's a great idea. Having been around the island, and I think I really love Northern Ireland. I think it's a great place, and I think it's great as it is. And I worry that if it becomes just part of Ireland, and particularly a part of Ireland where people are, where there's a whole loyalist community that really doesn't want to be part of the country that they're in. It's bad for those communities, but it's also bad for Ireland generally. Like, I even remember this in 2016 when I was talking to some people, because I talked to some people from basically the Irish version of the Foreign Office. I should be able to tell you what that's called, and I can't recall off the top of my head. I really did, though, go there. I went to the building in Dublin and chatted with a few people. It was very much about Brexit. And, you know, they were worried in a way that this would lead to a united Ireland if Britain voted to leave the EU. And what would happen is that you'd have, basically they would be now in, they would have to govern a group of people who didn't want to be part of Ireland, who didn't want to be part of the country that they were now part of. And that's perfectly understandable. That will be, if it happens, it will be a headache for the government in Dublin. I just don't see how it won't be. Why do you want to govern people who don't want to be part of your country and see themselves as part of another country? That never really goes particularly well. So I'm saying this not from someone who's agitating for United Ireland, just as someone who thinks, I think Brexit made it sort of inevitable. Unfortunately. Because essentially, I think economically and even culturally, you're going to see more of a going between of Northern Ireland and Ireland are just going to naturally sort of drift closer and closer into each other's orbits, while Northern Ireland just drifts away from Great Britain. I think one of the greatest sort of screw-ups politically that's ever happened in my lifetime is Northern Irish unionists embracing Brexit. That was a massive screw-up. How they couldn't see that it was just going to be a disaster for them. That Brexit, if it happened, would just be a complete disaster for them. How the DUP didn't see that. How the Ulster Unionists couldn't see that. Still confounds me because it was so obvious. Everything that's happened has been so obvious. I mean, the only thing that's surprising, really, is that it's happening so peacefully and so placidly and just so sort of inevitably and without resistance or violence. Thank God, by the way. But I'm just saying that's the only thing that's surprising about it. Brexit was always going to be terrible for the unionist cause in Northern Ireland. Terrible. Like, as in existentially ruinous. And that they went along with it. And that they went along with the Tories, who clearly never cared about them and didn't really care about Northern Ireland at all, and were very happy to just chuck the Northern Irish unionists, all their concerns, into the dust to get the Brexit that they wanted. All of that was totally inevitable and predictable, and how they couldn't see it is still so strange to me. Anyhow, we are where we are, and yeah, I think that's probably going to happen, because what you're going to see in Northern Ireland is the nationalist portion of the population is going to grow. The unionist portion is going to decrease. And what I mean by that is not just that Protestants are going to have less kids, because they probably are, but there's going to be the next generation, as the generations, like the generation that's coming up now, and then the generation after that that we're going to see coming of age in, let's say, 15 years. They are going to be even less attached to this idea of the union. They're just going to be like, well, I don't understand. Aren't we all Irish? You're going to see way more of that. And you're going to see a sort of dying out of the unionist sort of feeling. And part of me is a bit sad about that. I mean, not that I just don't care. I don't really have a horse in the race. I just sort of feel like the people who cling on will cling on hard. And it will be a smaller and smaller group of people, but they will be more and more fanatical, because that's how these things always go. It's how they always, always, always go. And if Dublin has a way to govern for the people of, I don't know, the hardcore unionist communities of Belfast, it's not obvious at the moment. I don't know really what they do. Also, I think it's going to be very confusing politically for Ireland, particularly given the voting system in Ireland, STV. I mean, you could end up with like a unionist party getting like a reasonable amount of seats in the Dáil, and actually maybe even holding the balance of power. I mean, these are things that no one wants to talk about and think about, I sort of feel. I mean, no one's talking about it in Britain because no one cares about Ireland at all. There's just no discussion. I mean, I think most Irish people would be shocked to understand how little discussion or thought about Ireland there is in any way in Britain. But I mean, even in Ireland, I don't think is there really talk about this? I'm not picking up on it. I mean, having read the media here, having been around it, I don't sense it. But then I've been here for a fortnight, and that's not really fair. So in the comments, let me know if you think there's more talk about this. I mean, genuinely, what do you end up with if you've got, like, I don't know, a Fine Gael DUP government in Dublin? What would that mean? What would that feel like to people? Because I think that's what a united Ireland sort of might mean. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. Thank you for everybody who watched. I will be following this up at some point when I'm back in London, and I'm slightly worried. I mean, in the sense, the content I've done on this holiday has been so positively received by so many people, and actually just really, I've got great viewing figures, which sort of makes me think, I could talk about Ireland more, but I don't know how much more I have to say about Ireland once I'm not here. We'll see. We shall see. Maybe I should talk about Ireland more. Maybe it should be a thing, because I really do think we should probably talk about Ireland more in Britain. I think it's really the fact that Ireland's right there and Irish politics is thought about pretty much not at all in Britain. Like, not at all. It's why when Boris Johnson made his deal and basically just screwed over the unionists, it was barely talked about in Britain. Like, I mean, even by the most right-wing people who would sing "No Surrender" or whatever at football matches, just really didn't give a shit. It was astounding to me. It really showed how much people don't care. Not only about like just the island of Ireland and what's going on there, just don't care. So maybe I should talk more about it. I just think it is important, and maybe I should put my money where my mouth is, particularly given that people seem to want to watch it. But anyway, I'll end it there. I like to keep these about 20 minutes long. I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. If you've watched this far, particularly, I mean, clearly I would think that you enjoyed the content. So if you could like the video, if you could leave a comment, if you could subscribe to the channel, that would all be extraordinarily helpful. And thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.